If you are going to stay standing for a bit, that's totally fine. This is a sort of informal event, so if you need to get up and move around, leave to go for the loo, etc., please feel comfortable to do so. Welcome, my name is Lucy Elms. I am Head of Curatorial Programme for Take Apart, and this is my collaborator.
I'm Ben Borthwick. My other job is at Cast, where I run the programme, and I've been working with Lucy for the last couple of years on stage one of a kind of community-focused skate project called Prime Design. We're very happy to have John from Prime here today, and then this is phase two, where we're kind of taking some of the kind of reflections on what we did with Prime Design and opening up a year of events and consultation with the wider skate community in the city, where Prime Design was focused on a very particular kind of age group of kind of post-primary 12-year-olds to 15-year-olds, at that moment when arts really disappear from the curriculum. We felt like if we could create something that would give young people that age who are into skating access to a kind of framework through which they could explore and learn how to create their own visual culture related to skating. So
I
was meant to just say my name.
And we're really, really pleased with the launch of Rolling Together to have the Drift Tricks sculptures, which I think many of you have already skated and interacted with. So it's a first outdoors public activation since they were designed by our Prime Design group with artists Bedir, Bekar, who we have here, and Danny Abu Hawa, who is probably listening and is joining us from Jordan today. And so, we are absolutely delighted and very thankful to the Box for letting us pop the sculptures up outside for 2 days. And is there any?
No, I mean, maybe just a bit of housekeeping. The toilets are just out there, and there's an exit there, and I don't know if there's any fire alarms planned.
We're not planning any fire alarms, so
okay.
if there is a continuous alarm, then staff will help guide you out, but basically the kind of rendezvous point is outside the Caffeine Club on that side of the building.
All right. So
and housekeeping continued. So we will be leaving promptly at 5:00, and then there will be a further hour to escape the sculptures outside, and then we're having a community consultation. So you're very welcome to stay and join us for all of that. And
that's really an opportunity to kind of say what you think about where things are at in the city at the moment, what you'd like to see, any changes, anything that we can maybe integrate into the programme over the next year.
Yep, and the panels are an hour long. There will be a Q&A section towards the end for about 10 minutes. So it's kind of segmented structure to each panel, but we'll let you know when we're welcoming questions.
Indeed.
Whilst also maintaining a fairly informal framing. Seth is doing some evaluation and impact for this programme. So if anyone has any burning comments and or would please like to contribute to our data and feedback about what we're doing, that would be incredibly useful. We're hoping to generate a whole sort of report about what we're trying to achieve, and so it's really, really great to have input from both Plymouth and people further afield for that. So Steph is here and will be hanging around afterwards. Great.
Okay.
Let's go.
All right. So we have 2 panels today, and we have some amazing speakers. We're so excited to be able to bring like people whose thinking and work in relation to skateboarding, both in sort of academic context, in community work they're doing, both often. We're really excited to be able to bring some brilliant people together for the day. The first panel is up here, public domain, building trust through urban planning, culture and skateboarding. And that reflects on some of the things that we did in the last 2-year project, but also on some, like politics that are unfolding in real time in the city, where the urban landscape is changing at quite a fast pace. And I think that, there's sort of different positions within the council, some of whom are very supportive, others of whom seem to be making decisions that have no consideration for, a community who's been kind of inhabiting the main plaza in the city for, upwards of 4 decades at this point. So this is a sort of live question that has sort of come to the foreground very recently, even though these are questions that we've been kind of dwelling on for some time. Very briefly, we have Chris Lawton, who is from Skateboard GB, but is here today in his community-related capacity with Skate Nottingham. Bedir, who Lucy already said, is one of the artists who created the drift trick sculptures that we have, who is in his day job as a structural engineer involved with many skate park constructions in the UK. And we have Dr. Esther Sayers, whose work at Goldsmiths is, well, Esther will talk about this. I'm not going to try and say what your PhD is, but is maybe widely known in the skate community as someone who is really behind the creation of this idea and implementation of skate dots on the UCL East campus that got kind of corralled into a micro park called City Mill. Now, I think we are going to start with Chris's presentation. Who's doing the... Okay. Take the mic, and Chris will...
Right. Yeah, thank you, Ben, for the introduction. So yeah, I'm going to talk about Nottingham. I'm going to talk about it as an example of what happens kind of when you get what you want. I'm not going to talk about the struggle of how we got there. I'm going to talk more about what's happening now that we're there. And I'm going to speak a little bit about Nottingham City. Forgive me for the rubbish font. I used a fancy font that didn't work on the laptop. So I'm a former economist, and I'm very interested in the role of what we do as skateboarders and how that might have kind of a larger impact. So to give you a very, very quick introduction to Nottingham, it's a former industrial city. It's one of the cradles of the Industrial Revolution, and it is having a tough time. Its local authority is one of the few big ones that have announced effective bankruptcy, as near as a local authority can be to being bankrupt, alongside Birmingham, Croydon, other great centres of skateboarding. And that's had some very, very kind of visceral results for the average person. 100% cuts to youth services, 100% cuts to the arts in terms of local government funding, 100% cuts to community and the voluntary sector. And Nottingham's gone from being quite prosperous in kind of 2010 to looking like it's having a really tough time now. And you can see from some of the stats, second lowest rate of pay in the country, third lowest household income, the lowest youth opportunity index rating. So there's a lot of challenges facing Nottingham for short-term reasons and long-term reasons. And one of the consequences of these challenges is a big inner-city shopping centre, which is by Broadmarsh Banks. For those of you at a certain age might recognise as a pretty famous skate spot. The shopping centre started being demolished, and then the owner of the shopping centre went bankrupt. So it's got frozen in a half-demolished form, and it's right in the centre of the city. So it's like a modern ruin that you have to walk through to go to the city centre. And there's all these very fancy, very kind of superstar designer Thomas Heatherwick came up with these sort of ideations of what it might look like. And of course, this hasn't happened. But the skaters had developed a pretty good relationship with the city council. because we were delivering at scale. So we were engaging about 1,000 young people every year, doing a lot of effectively youth work across the city, alongside getting a lot of skate parks built and doing a lot of activism. So the city approached us around developing a part of this former public realm into what became Tramline Spot. And I've spoken a lot about this project before, but it's a skateable or skate-friendly space in the city centre, right by the train station, right by the college, 3,000 to 4,000 students around the corner from it, and it's at the foot of Nottingham Contemporary. So we kind of got what we want. And there's loads of rad stuff that was similar to some of Esther's practice around, that's my childish drawings, around mass participation in designing the forms that Beton Park eventually built, and gallery exhibitions and all sorts of participative projects to ideate what we might eventually build. So it was a cool project that became very different from the original ideas that the landscape architect drew up. Also had a lot of urban greening around it. I think you can probably see Chanden's hand in one of these pictures. And very, very proud of both the installation of it, because the city ran out of money, so we had to fund it ourselves and install it ourselves and fill in all the gaps between the granite ledges ourselves and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty DIY, despite it being a big civil engineering project. And then we really threw ourselves into the activation of making sure there's women and girls sessions, big old events, all that sort of stuff. But this was all happening at a time of real challenge for the city. And this is the kind of what do you do when you get what you want. So Nottingham has seen one of the largest increases in homelessness in the country, one of the highest rates of youth suicide in the country. So it's really, really, it's not the fault of the local authority and their financial issue, but it's been exacerbated by that. And it's reduced formal institutions' ability to respond to those sorts of big challenges, which even included a fatal assault right by Tramline Spot. And some scapegoating of skateboarders, and skateboarders potentially being seen as being not responsible. And this is the interesting thing that I kind of wanted to throw into here. Nottingham City Council, to their credit, after a long period of mistrust and then growing trust and then collaboration, really bought the argument, really accepted the argument that skateboarders doing something positive in a space, particularly a space that intrinsically had risk of having negative stuff. It's covered over by the tram viaduct, it's right by the remains of the former Broadmeyer Centre, so there's ambient heat that comes off it. It's by Nottingham's only now probation offices, and a lot of people who are currently unhoused and very, very vulnerable adults are kind of being corralled into this space. I mean, you've got a lot of young people, you've got gang problems, there's lots of things that are affecting the space all at the same sort of time. And Nottingham City Council very much took to their heart the idea that we could make it better. Our presence could make this better. But what we actually experienced with the reduction of policing, a massive reduction of policing, a lot of police and community support officers losing their jobs, meant that we were becoming seen as more and more responsible for safety, welfare, public safety effectively, which is wild to me. So skateboarders going from being a nuisance to being, I mean, Tom Critchley has sort of joked about the perfect citizen. You don't have to pay us anything and we'll keep the space safe. And we found out we couldn't. Of course we couldn't. The problems were so significant, we were not able to fill the gap that was effectively left by policing. And this really creates a real reputational challenge for us. How do we stop the situation being seen as a failed experiment, which mucks it up for the rest of you? Oh, Tramline Spot in Nottingham, it's got homelessness, it's got street drinking, it's got hard drugs being taken, all this sort of stuff. You don't possibly want to do it. Anything like that in Plymouth. So the idea then becomes, well, we're in the mix, which makes us responsible. It gives us tools to intervene. So rather than seeing it as a kind of sad situation, it's significantly increased the feeling of responsibility of skateboarding within Nottingham's infrastructure. And skateboarding has become one of the few good news stories about Nottingham at the moment. We genuinely feel we become part of the glue that's holding the city together. And if Skate Nottingham were to as we're knackered and tired and a bit depressed, if we were to pull back how much we do, bad things would happen. So that's required us to change our strategies and to actually go into other parts of skate culture, DIY. So Nottingham, not to the extent of Birmingham with rubbish not being picked up, but Nottingham is looking like it is in crisis. There's stuff all over the floor, there is piles of rubbish everywhere. So we have realised we can start doing care and repair. We can start repairing the public realm. And the other thing that is interesting, Nottingham's a very green city, is, and a lot of skaters are interested in horticulture, by tramline spot there's an awful lot of green infrastructure, but no maintenance plan. So 60% of all the brand new green infrastructure is dying because it hasn't got any irrigation. And we can do something about that. We're in the space. So the idea that skateboarders can be both repairing the grey and greening the grey. Which is leading us to this kind of wild situation, this end point of going from skateboarding in the early 2000s, there's a bylaw that isn't enforced anymore, being seen as a nuisance that needs to be enforced against. Bedir and Richard Holland have spoken very eloquently about this craziness of being really worried about whether a granite ledge has got scuffs on it. You're not going to resell it. What are you going to do with it? Why are you worried about a granite ledge that is only going to end up in landfill, looking a bit worse for wear? It's because you're not seeing skateboarding as a legitimate use. Well, now skateboarding has started to be seen as a very legitimate use in terms of custodianship of public spaces, which has created a new set of problems. And we can see that what we're doing is really key to achieving a number of challenges for the city. How does it become a UN child-friendly city, for example? How does it meet its carbon neutral 2028 objectives? And we start becoming a key part of that. But we are not resourced to do that. So we're super overstressed and under-resourced. So our fundamental question has gone from how do we get skaters out of the place to how do we keep skaters in the place and how do we keep them safe? I think that's the talking points I'll be super keen to talk about with my esteemed colleagues.
Hi, I'm Bedir. Nice to meet you all. Within the context of who I'm here with, but also, I guess, sort of maybe speaking more from my experience as a practitioner, this is partly like a sort of who I am, what I do, my story, but also some of the things that Chris has touched on and what Esther's likely to touch on, and kind of themes and currents that have very much changed the kind of approach that myself and other esteemed people that I've known, whether that's in the professional skate park building world, the built sort of environment and architectural sort of world that I inhabit from my practice. There's sort of these crossovers that are sort of coming about, and I'd kind of quite like to take you through the story of kind of who I am, how I got here, why I've been involved with skateboarding, and then why that's kind of maybe make me realise that it's not just about skateboarding and skatable space and the artefacts that we create to unlock the city, but kind of a role that we sort of have to have in it. So for all intents and purposes, that horrible party question of like, what do you do for a job? Depends on who I'm talking to and how much I actually feel like talking about what I'm doing. But my sort of main formal training and practice is I'm a structural engineer or an engineer, but I've specialised and worked mainly with the engineering of artworks, and sort of the last sort of 5 or 6 years I've mainly been focusing on natural building and natural materials, so less to do with skateboarding but more to do with public realm buildings and art installations that sort of bring things forward that are more to do with the use of natural materials and our relationships we have with them. Now, how I got into the world of skateboarding and skate park stuff is there's a community with these things which we all kind of understand, right? With any subculture or anything that we do, and we all rely on each other to do different things, whether that's to police the spot and be the perfect citizen, whether that's to just show up and be there to have a beer with someone, or sometimes the council's telling us off about this ramp that we built and we need someone to come down and tell them that it's not going to fall over. And like that segue and that experience is kind of my work with artists and artist friends and my own design practice kind of meant that I was doing more around skate parks and building skatable things and trying to help community groups with kind of things that can unlock these spaces that they work on. More so, I sort of lost interest in the formal world of concrete skate parks that we often see a lot of, not because they're not good, they're amazing, they're fundamental, you need them in so many places, but I grew up in London, I grew up skating in London, I grew up skating in South Bank, and for like a, kids of a first gen immigrant, like, that's a great place for you to be able to go and disappear and do things where, you know, you don't have the same opportunities to be able to do the things that some of your more affluent friends or classmates would be able to do. And it's a community that sort of would look after you, and you would learn from a lot of elders. Those kinds of things then led to me working on Stockwell Skate Park and the resurfacing and the regeneration of that. Kennington Skate Park is another one that we're working on at the moment, but that's an engineering exercise of bringing back heritage features. Hackney Bumps was another thing that I'd sort of worked in the background of helping with. But throughout all of those experiences, the thing that I realised more and more was I was doing less of the technical and formal architectural design elements of helping people design things and realise these things, because if Drift Tricks is proof of anything, it doesn't need an artist to really design it, because there's a community that can design it and has a better understanding of what you want. So that is very much a sort of thing that's like, you have to tap into that first for a really good design execution. But also just sort of realising that it's not just about skateboarding anymore. There's a lot of the kind of, in order to be able to bring those positives, certain members of the community have to be able to see themselves as mediators. And often that's with public bodies, often that's with people that might be the builder who might not want to do it the way that you would want to build this because you have a particular finish or a requirement that you have in it. And it's that sort of ability of like, you know, with Stockwell Skate Park, one of the things I learned was I wasn't actually helping them deal with the engineering plan for resurfacing thing, because I'd sorted that out and nailed that. And, you know, in the practice, we'd worked that out amongst colleagues about what's the least material, what's the best way, what's the most sensitive thing. It was literally going to meetings and mediating between skateboarders and the council. And you have to realize that that's a function that you have to, like, I'm saying this more for the like grassroots friends of ours and the homies of ours that are out there. And like, there's some people here that I know who understand that within their work. Hello, nice to see you in a long time. But you know, that's something that if there's a grassroots element of what you're doing, you know, you have to start to maybe see some elements of how you can formally be useful for each other. And part of the reason I say that is that was quite a checkered history we had with Drift Tricks out there. It was the participation and the engagement with the community was like sort of right at the end of the pandemic, so no one's hanging out with each other, everyone's in their own space. That was an interesting bridge to sort of pull a data set from and come up with ideas for what you're doing. At the same time, you know, it's just sort of really highlights to you that like, no matter what you think you're doing, other people will have different perceptions of it. And we had so much support from members of the local authority on so many creative and technical levels. And it just takes one department to misunderstand something. And if that's a difficult bridge for you to cross, we actually crossed that really well. It was just that they didn't want to budge. I don't want to talk too badly of the highways department. But, you know, like, I think that's an element of something that sometimes often gets overlooked in the kind of organising of communities to be able to do things for their spot. And some of the stuff that Chris touched on about how you become a participatory sort of custodian of architectural space rather than just skatable space is kind of the best way for you to be able to bridge things, because otherwise you're talking to people with a very niche sort of subset of understanding and a sort of very kind of specific way of understanding things. That's fine if you're building a like formal skate park that's been signed off and sanctioned and is effectively just a treadmill, right? Because it's you're running in a defined space. You know, that's sort of kind of one of my main reflections that I've been taking more and more. And I think the other thing is it's a very hard sell, more and more so when people are becoming environmentally conscious, to just speak of the materials of skateboarding and that as a skatable space. There is a holistic context within which you have to cite yourself in. And for the designers in the room, and part of what my focus has been, is to try and pull away from the library of standard industrialized construction and to try and go for something that's a bit more natural and or really industrial that like evokes a reaction in people. That's more likely to make your space also be watched and wondered about, not just skated. I think I've done my time. Or am I running over? You looked at me like really concerningly. I've got another minute. You know, it's kind of always a really strange one for me, because there's sort of, I'm kind of one of those, like myself and Danny are kind of one of those helpful people that get dragged in to sort of help like conceive a situation. But so much of what we do is actually reliant on input and data from everyone else around us. And that's first and foremost the community that uses it. And for the skateboarders in the room, that's not just the skateboarders. And I think that's sometimes a really hard thing for a lot of skateboarders to admit, particularly with the sort of entitlements that we can have about space. So sort of over the last kind of 10 years of buildings, skate parks, skatable spaces and artworks, like I think that's just the most common theme that seems to be underpinning things these days more and more. And that's really sort of kind of all I have to really say before I lead on to Esther.
All right, hello, I'm Esther, and I think I'm going to show you a few slides from the project City Mill Skate in London that I was part of, really because I want to talk about trust, this thing about trust that's part of the sort of words around this panel. And what we've engaged in is a process of genuine consultation, and that means trust working in two directions, that information passes from skateboarders to authorities, but also that it works the other way around, that there is a process of listening in order to kind of have an authenticity around that trust. So I'm just going to sort of go through some of the ways that we've enabled that, partly because, and this is a bit weird, I'm kind of starting at the end and then I'm going to go backwards, or I'm kind of starting in the middle. We'd built the concrete basically by the time this photograph was taken, but we'd only just done the planting and it was all very fresh out the box, as it were. And it occurred to me that concrete alone was not going to build the community that we desired in this space. And the whole reason for the project was to engage with local communities, engage with local skate communities, do it with the funding of the University College London funded the project. So it was it was a research project. It was kind of labelled as a research project because that made it palatable to the powers that be at the university who were signing off the funding to say, oh yes, we can see the value in this because it's leading to some useful research. And so we framed it in that way in order to do two things. One was about the planning, design and construction of spaces for skateboarding, but the other was about bringing a human and social presence and integrating that into it so that the two remained interlinked. And I said, you can't build communities out of concrete, because I was afraid of what we were then going to do. We'd actually spent all the budget to get it there. We'd spent all the budget on the concrete. There was nothing left for the people that then were needed to do the lessons, do the activations, bring in activity. So a problem, you know, that's a problem that we face in many of these kind of projects. And yeah, I'll come back to that at the end. Oh, now I'm just going to go, where's my arrow? Is it that one? Yeah. Thank you. Something that's really obvious when you're not in the middle of talking to a room full of people. So we started with focus groups, and this was to gain understanding from the local skate community. It was really important that a project like this didn't just parachute in. We needed to kind of understand what was already there. In the middle, at the bottom, was a DIY spot called Lakeside that had been there for a while, quite a troubled experience of being kind of moved around and eventually taken away. We needed to talk to them, we needed to talk to BMXers, we needed to talk to local people and others who already skated, who'd already produced things to skate around the Olympic Park. And we wanted to draw from that knowledge and experience so that we could represent those ideas to the authorities, but also so that we had these focus groups, these conversational groups that we could then bring information back to as well. Kind of project group in a sense. But I was very interested in what Bedir was saying about mediators. This project, I said it's a research project, it was a practice-based research project, so it's very much based around making, but very much based around more of the kind of way that an artist works. I'm trained as an artist, and was working closely with Beton Park to deliver, and my colleague Sam Griffin, who co-founded it with me, and we wanted to make sure that when we did this process of genuine consultation, we could listen effectively to what people were saying to us. And we didn't think that was going to work with words alone. So we wanted people to make models of the things that they thought they might like to skate. So we gave them materials. It was locked down. We couldn't do workshops. We hand delivered most of these kits out to people so that a bunch of people could make prototypes of some of the kinds of things, some based on local history, like the Yardley's soap factory that was actually on the Olympic Park and made bars of soap. Others made more kind of fanciful designs. You'll see some elements of these later on. I want you to keep your eye on that purple plasticine cylinder because it's going to appear again in a minute. So this was a process of making prototypes, tangible things, but through making models of skate dot, listening through the materials, because as you can see, they're really different. People approach these things in different ways. If you were in the council offices having a conversation about stuff that you might like to skate, you wouldn't get to that detail of different finishes, different shapes and things. You would probably err more towards the kind of list of flat bank, quarter, things that already are known. So this was a way to try and break away from that. We did it in various different ways. But then those models needed to meet professional processes. So working with Beton Park meant that having made things out of plasticine and clay, we could photograph them and put them into SketchUp and render them like kind of professional architectural drawings. And that had a couple of useful processes. One was that it gave it status. So when we're then going back to the powers that be that have got the money and say, actually, we could do with another 40 grand to make this, we can show them these kind of nice looking things. But it also allowed a kind of collective imagination, a sharing, a trust, a kind of this thing about information going both ways. We could imagine together what it might be like to put those things in the space of the Olympic Park and think about more effectively, because we could see it in front of us, what it might be like to skate them, because we had kind of prompts for that imagination. And so the purple thing, tube, that was made out of plasticine in one of our summer courses, and it had a blue tack rainbow rail over the top, appears again in the rendering. I haven't got them in this presentation, but we rendered them, did 4 different renders of complete spaces for 4 different locations, but we kept getting moved on and told we couldn't do it there, we couldn't do it there, so we had to keep reimagining where this might be possible. But eventually they were built, and here's the purple cylinder with its blue tack rail. Wouldn't be too good to skate, but it exists as a real iteration in full size. The thing about planting that Chris mentioned, that's a real thing, and our planting is now, it was supposed to get looked after by the Olympic Park Authority, and it's almost all dead now because there's been not enough watering, and it's it's a problem to think. But, and where I wanted to get to was this thing about activation, that actually these things only started to come alive once the jams started to happen and the lessons started to happen, and we were able to kind of bring people to the site, create a space that was welcoming for all sorts of different people that skated locally. At the moment, we've no money though, it's run out. And the trouble with activation is that that money needs to keep coming, and that's quite difficult. At the moment, I'm involved in a team who are doing a piece of work for Skateboard GB around the skatable spaces in the UK. We're at the really beginning part of getting the data back, but from the first sets of data that are coming in, what we are really interested to be finding out is that there are actually quite a lot of skatable spaces in the UK, but many of them have been empty when our researchers have gone out, and empty to that point where there's glass on the ground, like nobody's skated here for quite a long time. And so it becomes really interesting to see that these activations aren't happening. As we all know, as budgets have been cut, the lessons are going, the opportunities to build communities through those kind of interpersonal, human, social activities are kind of perhaps tapering out a little bit at the moment. So I'm kind of, that's a very early stage on findings from there, but something that I think we're going to, as a community, need to keep an eye on as we activate our cities.
In the middle of the table.
Definitely.
I think for me, the one thing that there's a common thread, which is kind of brings me back to one of my kind of lodestone favourite ways of thinking about architecture in the built environment is, you know, like so much of the focus for, you know, like investment, for councils, for developers is on, you know, architecture as these kind of agglomerations of material that land in a space and go up. When, you know, actually I think maybe there's a different way of thinking about architecture, which is the social relations that those structures enable and that bring to life these buildings that, you know, like we're here at the museum today and is kind of buzzing and thriving and huge visitor numbers. I think they just passed the 1 millionth visitor mark since reopening in 2020. You know, 5 years before that, it was quite a sort of dusty, sleepy place. You know, it didn't have this presence in the city and this relevance to the communities that it's part of, that it's here to serve, that it's here to kind of lead towards things and to represent, you know, like act as some kind of a, probably distorting, but some kind of a mirror in which people can see themselves, their past and their futures. And I think that, you know, that's something that each of you have spoken about in different ways, that, you know, that really kind of gets to the crux of the matter. And I mean, Chris, you pose this question of what do you do when you get what you want? Yeah. You know, that's the kind of classic sort of campaign shift from campaigning to kind of governing in some ways. You know, not only in terms of, you know, how a skate is perceived, you know, particularly by authorities, but also, you know, in terms of yourself. Like, are you always fighting for change? Well, you know, what happens when you sort of hold that responsibility, and what do you do with it? Bedir, you also talked about sort of South Bank as being this kind of intergenerational community where, you know, there's a different kind of socialization than at home. And Esther, yeah, you can't build communities out of concrete. You know, that's just this sort of beautiful sort of distillation of, you know, yeah, you can build it, but then what do you do with this lump of concrete if there's no kind of framework through which to kind of build? And, you know, often communities will form kind of intuitively and slowly and mutate into what they are, but, you know, how can we can't remember who it was who was talking about mediators. Yeah, how can sort of those people within communities who have a sort of leaning or experience of certain ways of doing things, how can we kind of start to steer and influence the way that things might evolve for a wider benefit? So, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, someone who's ever present in these sorts of conversations, like a big blonde handsome ghost, Malma's Gustav Eden, like Rad quote, not Bad quote. He did a talk on Tuesday where he spoke a lot about what we've just kind of abutted against, this idea that local government, formal bodies, formal funders, particularly now, in my career, now more than ever, are much more willing and able to invest in physical capital, manufactured capital. So Rachel Reeves, for example, she's prepared to break her golden rules in order to spend, to invest. It's okay to spend as long as we're building things that will at some point give us a benefit in the future. And what Gustav argued about the benefit of skateboarding and things like skateboarding, although arguably there's not many things like skateboarding, is that it's almost free social capital. It brings the social capital alongside the manufactured capital. But I think what we've really experienced, again to a really visceral level in Britain, with the political decisions that have been made by a number of governments, is that we're not, and to throw some boring terms into the audience, capital investment is stuff, built stuff. Revenue is what you spend on things, people. And local authority after local authority and local authority will say, we haven't got any budget for revenue. We can only build things, we can't do things. So there's been an absolutely farcical and very sad outcome in Nottingham. One of its largest estates and one of the largest post-war estates in the country, Clifton, has got a very large outdoor skate park, which is dilapidated now. And it has a brand swanky new youth club, which is closed, has never opened, because they were able to invest some of the 20 million of town fund in building the youth club, but they were never able to fund the youth workers to work there. So it's now leaking of its brand new recording studio, and will probably never be bought to do anything that the young people can actually be engaged with. So we provide free social capital in an environment where it is very, very difficult currently to bring that social capital into the public space. The question is, how do we sustain that?
I mean, not only sustain, but how do you create a situation that you've managed to in Nottingham where, like, that value is recognised, and, I think it's often more conflicted than that, where it might be recognised in some quarters but not in others, which can kind of lock the gears and mean that it's very hard to make progress.
I do think part of that comes from admitting to whoever you're negotiating with about creating these spaces that you don't have the answer for everything. And I think that was one thing that I'd always noticed Skatenots were pretty good at, was like, it's not a panacea for the city's problems, and no matter how much it tries to get lumped on you because everything's really austere at the moment, like, I think that was a really important dialogue to sort of have with people about those kinds of spaces. I also, just speaking back to that sort of South Bank thing, it's like, it's part of also the reason why I sort of went down my professional career, and also partly decided to actually pay attention to stuff at school, because I got taken to the side by, like, actually one of the layabout older guys. He was just like, yeah, you're not doing this, like, you're not, you kids aren't turning out the way that we did, get the fuck out of here, kind of a thing. And that's, that, or sometimes the risk of maybe getting mugged or something unsavoury happening at these spots is like a real thing that you kind of can't sugarcoat for people, but like, it's a very fundamental experience in architectural space to negotiate with people, because otherwise you're never going to get that message to anyone up at the higher up as well. I think that's a really important aspect of it for me personally. Yeah.
Now that you've all sat down, the back row can't hear you.
Can you not hear us?
Oh.
A bit louder.
Okay.
I was using my inside voice.
I think people could argue with what I'm saying, because you might say, well, build it and they will come. There doesn't need to be activations. You build the stuff, you leave it there and let people use it as they will. But I'd see a really strong role in bridging this gap for artists, for educators, for other people who act in these kind of mediating roles. We need that, and we've had that so stripped out by the closure of youth centres and the lack of opportunities for young people to be engaged in leisure activities outside of school. It's so much of it's gone that we're making deserts. We might be making concrete deserts, and I'm concerned.
It's ironic that we're making them with there's a sort of prevailing mindset of everything being really risk averse, right? And that was kind of the intention behind the drift tricks obstacles a little bit. And more so the design developed to become that way as we sort of found some resistance from, be that, what happens if a board flies out? What happens if someone hurts themselves on it or whatever? And the whole thing was, the design, Danny wrote this fantastic brief at the time when there was all these climate sort of catastrophes going on around the UK. We're, engaging with a group of really young sort of engaged sort of skaters that we imagine these parts of the civic centre and buildings falling off and rusting. And the whole intention was it's supposed to look like you could probably really hurt yourself on it even though you couldn't. And it's a jagged piece of metal because the old chap with his grandkids that showed up earlier, the kids were really excited about it and he was like, oh, what's going to happen? But then he ends up talking to someone and being like, what is this even doing here? It's just a lump of bit of rusty metal. And it's no, it's not rusty metal, Granddad. It's actually, oh really? And you can't, I don't know, that was a very direct provocation of that, but it's I remember one of the Stockwell meetings where it's someone at the council was do we need to put up a fence around the famous wall for what's flying out of it? And someone was just well, if you just put a wall there, someone else can try and do something on it. Yeah. Do you really need to bait this risk out? That was a little bit element of it today.
I mean, a question to kind of throw back to ourselves is as skateboarding has become more established and more recognised as a positive thing, and potentially, arguably, more sportified, do we lose some of this ability to provide this very, very adaptive social capital? We had a panel discussion in Nottingham last April, and a gentleman asked Darryl Nobbs from Beton Park a question of, can you see a future? And he was asking this in good faith. He was not from a skateboarding background. His son was skateboarding. Could you see a future in which we'd be able to avoid coming to a skate park when it's busy by being able to book slots? Is this possible? So he was bringing a kind of almost a leisure centre experience. And Darryl was aghast at the question. And initially responded in quite a kind of dismissive way, then apologised because he's lovely, and tried to explore it a little bit more. But we're finding a lot in Nottingham where we've got a lot of very committed young skateboarders with committed, interested parents who've been going to the indoor park. The indoor park has recently closed. So now this community of young, good skaters, and they're all very young, they're 11 or 12, have to suddenly start going to public spaces, including tramline spot. And then there's a lot of kind of backlash. Got to go there with these folks. And to me, that's losing something about that learning that you've described, Bedir, of when you're in an environment where you have to be a little bit streetwise and you're getting all the peer-to-peer learning from the older, both the inspirational older characters like Rich Holland, but also the dropouts who are telling you not to be like that. Mm. And it's hugely transformative for your life skills. But you don't get that in a glass and steel of a leisure centre. So does some of the sportification that we're seeing make us less able to provide this adaptive, free, super agile social capital, particularly in times of crisis, because some of our own community push back against it? I don't know. It's not, we want to get good at skateboarding, and I've only got an hour and a half to get good at skateboarding. I can't possibly mediate between the situation.
I mean, that's something that I think that is, fortunately, our indoor park is still here and is growing and has actually become massively more community focused and kind of thinking about people who don't skate.
Yeah, shout out for being the first to host it when it couldn't find a home.
Well, exactly. Exactly. Prime hosted drift trips when we weren't able to put it at Civic, and I think they're also hosting girl only and non-binary nights. Board mums were there for their fortnightly booking last night, so they're opening up the space in a way that conventionally, maybe it wasn't 10 years ago, and I think that for me, it's not skateboarding dies because of the Olympics, but rather how these different elements can fit together and open things up. So maybe councils understand the Olympics in a way that they don't understand a gnarly street sport.
But councils need to be able to start envisioning urban spaces as pedagogical. Councils need to actually get on board with the idea that these are spaces for learning, as well as all sorts of other things. But stuff happens here that needs a kind of, I don't think quite structuring in terms of that hour-and-a-half slots, but we do need to think about the way that we enable use and not just expect use to happen. I think.
So the shift from a kind of city centre, from a space of consumption to a space of kind of learning.
Yeah, and also that old school architectural notion of like, I've designed a really good building because I've really thought about it. People are going to use it, and it just doesn't happen, does it? Like, I don't know. It's reminds me a bit of that notion as well.
Yeah.
Now, I'm conscious of time. Thank you, Lucy. So we should open up if anyone's got any questions. We've got a couple. Let's.
Sorry, it's more an observation rather than a question, and I've been to many of these panels now, in quite a few places, and we always get trapped in a conversation, and the conversation is about space, and the space being this space. Skateboarding isn't about that. It's about creativity, it's about a way of thinking about a bigger cultural space. And I think if we lose that, and I think you've all pertained to it in everything that you said, every single person here without actually saying it, is that we use cities.
Yeah.
We don't use a park, we don't use a skate park as its entity by itself. We use a city. And I think that's really important. And when it comes to pedagogy, that's the message we need to get across to councils. You go from one park to the next, and along the way there's something to skate. Does it stop you from skating it because there's this park that's been given to us? And I often say that because it is the way it's perceived. We've given you this skate park, now skate it.
Yeah.
Don't skate this spot anymore. Don't skate, because this is your park. And that for me is where we're losing the creativity of skateboarding. We're losing what, as 14, 15, 16-year-olds gave us that mindset of creativity. And that worries me, because now we do have skater mums, skater dads who have never skated but their kids skate, and they turn up and they do ask about slot times and this. No, it's never what it was about. So for me, where a council can engage with how a city works as a space and how it can be utilised as a space, and not just think about it as we are providing this, then we'll see something exciting happen in the cities.
And
Other Leo, fruity French Leo, says the city is the star.
Yes.
And I think if we lose that as skateboarders, we lose the full transformational impact that we can have at a time in public policy when the city isn't the star. Sorry to quote myself from some rambles upon LinkedIn earlier on this week. We're in a really unique time where we've had not all of the Conservative-led governments, but several of the Conservative-led governments moving towards quite an anti-city perspective, metropolitan elite. The urban becomes the dirty word. And funding has followed that. We've got the Towns Fund and not the Cities Fund. And we're not really clear with the newish government of whether there is a renaissance of cities. Like, there isn't an urban policy. And a lot of big, important cities are in decline, are in crisis. And because we as skateboarders care about the city, as she's so eloquently kind of illustrated, in a holistic way, in its roots, we journey from space to space, we have social space, all that stuff. We record it, we place make, we create these incredible images. You create some incredible images of the city as it could be, as the aspirational city. That then made me as a country bumpkin want to go to the city because I saw these amazing images. When we lose that role of skateboarding as a kind of an urban practice that loves all of the city and its links and its history and its heritage, we lose this sort of moment where we could be a key part of the debate which generates this new urban policy in a moment when we don't have an urban policy as a country.
But equally, what you've identified there, Kirsty, is it was
the failing of our skate dots, in the sense that the original plan was that they were dots across the Olympic Park, and you would travel from one to the other. But the whole business of ownership of space is the thing that we need to crack, because in the end we were only given this space, and it's just like you say, and now people get stopped for skating, or you can skate across the Olympic Park, but you can't do tricks. So if you do a trick, they politely say to you, go to the skate park, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we're going to have this problem all over the place if we don't crack the issue around space ownership.
And we saw that in Tokyo. This is why I engage with this conversation so much, because we saw it after Tokyo Olympics, where we saw these spaces and suddenly it was taken away from all the Japanese youth culture. They're like, you can't skate anymore. And it's like, wow, we have to engage in that question of how do we change that thinking as well, alongside we're going to create this. We have to really think about that thinking behind it.
I do think an element of that, just without getting too much into the sort of industrialised economics of how buildings and architecture and things are produced, but like everything is very disposable, and it's much easier for you to repair it, like to get rid of it, or to just flatten it after it's done its use and replace it with something else, than to find a way of reusing that space or that material or those assets or whatever it might be behind it, right? And I think the one thing that I am aligning myself more with is I actually work a lot less on skatable projects and skatable spaces, and pretty much really only try to work with DIY groups nowadays. So like friends at the Grove, anyone who needs a bit of advice on like just getting some stuff going in their town or whatever. Because the one thing that anything that's had a good DIY thing to it is it's had the history of people being like, what are you doing pouring concrete there? It's like, oh, we're just making a ramp, like, I promise, just all we need, we won't make a mess. All the way through to like people who are then willing to defend the things that they've actually had some involvement in. The thing is, like, traditional consultation and participatory design methods within the context of like architecture and city planning now is it's just like a token gesture to show you that you've maybe been considered. And like, I'm not using the C word, it's a beast, but like, and it's a really hard beast, but like everything's about cost and spaces at premium. So I'm not trying to sound too punk or anarchic, but it's like for the people in the space that want to use a space, just go and fucking do something, and just start arguing with people. That doesn't mean that you can't be nice. You can't, I think there's also a bit of a British notion of like, we don't want to upset people because it might actually make things really difficult for us. But like, in a way, the way that we've been approached after upsetting people has actually been a lot more positive with drift ticks than when we were trying to be nice with them all the way along, give them what they want, and then realise like we're just pandering to their requests. So I think that would be my only combat that I would give to it. And I think a little bit of it is like we like to romanticise the Italian or the like Mediterranean square and like the way that people just talk to each other and argue and everyone's bumping into each other and it's really beautiful. We don't fucking do it because everyone's too polite and British about everything, and I mean this in the nicest way to the British people in the room, but like, you might have to lose that a little bit as well.
Right, well, I'm going to be rude and cut in on you. Paul, we had a question, and then someone else at the back as well.
Okay, I'll shoot. Thinking of all of the skate culture involved with sitting there and thinking of Scotland and the tramline spot. What you said, Chris, particularly about what happens when you get what you want, it takes me back to like some classic skate academia, ocean howl, the gentrification, the broom, right? Skateboarders are used to sweep out unsavory populations. Once we've done that, we're swept out ourselves and gentrification takes place. But what seems to be happening now, and I've seen the same thing in Exeter when I spoke to the council, like the whole point of positivity towards the skate park is, well, it's self-policing. And not just self-policing, it's community policing. So there is now this added burden that skateboarders are actually doing something broader for the community, but the kind of the twist is actually skate park attracts people that didn't have a space previously. So, two things that all of you can respond to. Have we become gentrified because we are now the good guys? And should we actually be building skate parks? And I know that, again, this is different because each of your skate parks does a different thing. Should we be building skate parks, or should we just be getting rid of skate stops? Just let us back into we should be arguing for the city, right? I mean, this is, there's no ambiguity here. This is what I think. We should be allowed to use the city, and then the whole of the city is policed. If that's how you want to use us broadly, not in one location like Kirsty said. That's my pitch.
Being at this stage with the Skateboard GB Skateable Spaces work, there's a lot of skate spaces that have already been built and that have been built in the last few years. So yeah, that idea of us reusing the spaces that we've got and removing skate stoppers seems to have an awful lot of legs for me. I can't remember the other bit of your question, Paul. I was so busy following it along. Have we been gentrified? Yeah.
Because City Mill has got a really nice vibe about it because you're in a wasteland. There isn't anything else there, so people go there specifically to skate.
Yeah.
Right, which works, but tramlines is not like that. Right? There's a different thing going on.
Yeah.
So.
But City Mill is so in a process. It's only going to exist for probably another 2 years, and then UCL will do their next phase of building, so it'll be gone. So we've just got 2 years to do the cultural shift that we need to see on the Olympic Park, because ultimately what I would like to see is skaters being able to use the car park in the winter. In a way, for me, that's what it's all about. It's all about a proof of concept. We are using our current design and our skate dots to prove a concept, so that when it does get taken apart, we can say that was valuable. Let us put some incidental skate dots on the edge of your new building and let us use the car park, kind of thing. So in response to the gentrification, yeah, maybe, but perhaps it works to our advantage. I'm a pragmatist, so I guess I would, and I'm always trying to change minds and influence. That's what I see my role as a kind of mediator in this. I'm able to kind of speak back to authority because they get a bit surprised at what you skate. So perhaps I am using that gentrification. And Ocean said that a long time ago, and I think we're ready to have a little think about that now, actually. And I think Chris was doing
Yeah, I've got sort of 2 thoughts that I can hit quite briefly, and I think also riffing off a couple of questions that Kirsty asked. Your friend Matthew, and because I'm awful, I can't remember his surname, but he said something super eloquent about skateboarding isn't all about space, it's about time. It's about moments in time that we share together. And people will have a bit of tarmac road that we had a pop-up, and they'll remember that for the rest of their lives. So sometimes we get over-focused on space and we forget time. And in Nottingham at this time, gentrification isn't a worry. We've done some gentrification, we ain't got no gentrification. Some investment, some developers' interest might help address some of these issues. The other thing a long time is us, is the human factor. And skateboarding as the us has changed. And it's changed in a lot of good ways. It's become a lot more diverse and a lot more inclusive. So the us of the 90s, like the legendary Rob Selly, I remember reading in Sidewalk about him regulating and smacking someone in the chops in a situation and making it safer for everyone else by being a tough guy. And skateboarding doesn't do that so much. We're not confident to be tough guys and knock people out in public anymore. That's for the good. The challenge now is, if we have to regulate, how do we regulate? And that comes back to this negotiation and mediation space. I think Tampere in Finland have shown us how to be kind to the unhoused population, how to bring people in, how to provide, because you're in the space, you can help provide a service. And because that service is trusted and known and valued, you don't get exploited by the cash-strapped municipality. So that adaptation and strategy and focus on the times that we create as well as spaces, and us bringing the focus back onto who are we as skateboarders and what value can we provide as a culture and a community, and sort of unshackling this hyper-focus we have in spaces.
I'm just going to come to the back because there's one question which we haven't really got time to answer, but let's ask it, and if anyone has a very quick one-liner, but I think it would be useful for the room to hear it so that it can continue in the discussion afterwards. So.
Okay, sorry. You're right. So just not really so much of a question, just to sort of chip in. Everything you guys are saying really interesting. My background, I'm involved with a company called Canvas. This isn't applied. I'll explain why. We set up about 10 years ago, and we thought we'll call ourselves Canvas Spaces. We're not going to be Canvas Skate Parks. There's a point to the story. We build about 10 projects a year, probably tendering for probably 50 projects a year. And in 10 years, we probably put in 1 or 2 blocks in a city centre. You could count on one hand how many sort of projects are out there that would be, like an exciting city centre project. And kind of similar to what Bedir might have said at the beginning, skate parks, they're a different entity to what we're talking about here, really. And I suppose like the point I was going to make is like something like, say, Mile End, for example. I grew up in London as well. I used to go to South Bank when I was very young. And Mile End, before I moved to Bristol, that's still very much a skate park, but I always use Mile End as an example because that's quite an open space of flat land, but still classed in my mind as a skate park. But if that went out to a council tender, which I don't think it probably did, it would have got chucked in the bin and be like, what is that? There's no ramps in here, that's not a fun skate park. We've put lots of bids in where councils have come back and said, we don't get it, that's not a flagship park, something terrible is being built. And then the last point I'd make is making up a hypothetical, this is kind of to help the project, hypothetical situation. If we had someone working at Canvas, like starting a made up situation, after a couple of years they might think, I'm going to leave, I'm going to change things up, we're going to get out there and we're going to do different stuff to skate parks. No, you're not. The community will do that. So we haven't got the power to, as a skate park or skate spaces company, we haven't got that power to influence. Like if something's happening in Plymouth, we haven't got the power to say, right, this is what's going to get built. It comes from these meetings and informs the brief. Because at the moment, those briefs aren't there really. And again, hopefully I'm not waffling. But it's 2 separate things, skate parks and skate spaces. But skate spaces, if it goes through a tender scenario, which probably would have to be with the council, it'd have to be really from the absolute bottom up from the community. This is what we're having, because the minute a skateable space skate park company gets involved in the tender, they have to, they're kind of having to get involved without presenting their ideas. So it will go to a group. And at what point does it become a skate park again? The group will say, oh, that's a nice space, but there's a heck of a lot of space here. Could we maybe fit a quarter pipe in? And it's like, the quarter pipe goes in. And, then, maybe it goes to the school and somebody wants a spine around. And before you know it, it's just a skate park like anything else. So at what point does that become a skate park? That's, now I'm really waffling. But,
Well, I think that is the existential question, isn't it? Yeah. And I think maybe, the fact that the slab at the Dina is just this sort of like weird, what is it?
Well, we were involved in King Eddie's that Chris showed earlier, and it went viral for being horrendous. And it's the only, I don't really go online, but it's the only time in my life I nearly went online to say this is our favourite skate park. I couldn't be bothered. Oh, no, I think we did. We said something anyway, but people didn't get it. Even kind of experienced skaters didn't get what it was trying to do. Just a non-skate park space, a bit of flat land, a bit of this, and people were like, "Where's the quarter pipe? Where's this?" So it's very difficult. So the support needs to come from the local area.
I mean, I think that's maybe a good place to end, because in some ways what you've just been talking about is collapsing this gap between kind of architecture that people interpret and sort of misuse from architectural intentions into the space of the park.
Again, like Bedir says, there's nothing wrong with a skate park. In an open city centre, and you like bowls, you're not going to like the city centre, are you? So,
exactly.
but
we can continue that conversation later, but I think we're out of time. Thank you very much, Chris, Bedir and Esther.